George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
He's Henry the 13th, he is. Yes. Heinrich the 13th, the Prince of Reus in Germany, is tonight under arrest. A relative of the Kaiser arrested for planning to lead a military-backed coup to overthrow the German Republic. Don't switch off. This is not a spoof. This actually happened. 4,000 German police officers arrest 25 people, including former military chiefs and a prince of the royal house we thought was no more. What could possibly go wrong? A coup in Germany. And how did it come about? Elon Musk is proving a princely thorn in the flesh of the man buns and man bags of the liberal commentariat, having just proved once and for all, in black and white, if you're still allowed to say that liberal is the last thing they are. They are tyrants, authoritarians, who are determined to ride roughshod over basic freedoms that were once the lingua franca of, well, liberals. And the war drags on. Weapons supplied by the United States are landing 400 miles inside Russia on Russian air bases containing Russian nuclear weapons. Blinken said we neither enabled nor encouraged Ukraine to fire those weapons. But of course, nobody believes that. It's going to be a bumpy ride, as Betty Davis once said, because this is the one and only mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
That's right, Henry the 13th, he is, or presumably was, he might be stripped of his princeling title, if that's possible, under German law, but he was, apparently, according to the German state, and 4,000 police officers with weapons acted on this very day. He was planning to overthrow democracy in Germany, to overthrow the German Republic, to reinstate the First World War monarchy with him as the king, the Kaiser, as we used to know. Kaiser Henry. What could possibly go wrong? Comic opera, of course. It all sounds a bit like the beer hall putsch in Munich in 1923, November, to be precise. November 1923, Adolf Hitler staged a similar kind of armed coup to overthrow the Weimar Republic. None of us know what happened next, of course. Now, the turmoil in the Weimar Republic, which led ultimately to the triumph of Hitler fascism, of the Nazi beast, which went on to cause the deaths of almost 100 million people in the 1930s and 1940s, ending just 9 years before I was born, so not exactly ancient history, was the economic collapse of Germany. A collapse engineered by the idiot policies of Western countries towards Germany, which pushed them over the precipice into economic catastrophe through the Treaty of Versailles and the punitive policy of reparations, of forcing Germany to destroy its own economy in order to please the Western powers. You see where I'm going here? The only reason there is any scintilla of possibility of a successful military coup in Germany is because the German economy is presently being destroyed at the behest of the same idiot Western leaders in France, in Britain, and in the United States of America, as caused the rise of Hitler in the first place. Germany's industry is being systematically destroyed where it is not being dismantled and shipped, amongst other places, to the United States of America. The German Nord Stream 2 pipeline was blown up by American weapons coordinated by British Special Boat Service engineers, frogmen, and targeters. Britain and the United States destroyed a vital multi-billion euro piece of German economic infrastructure. Now, having forced Germany not to accept any of the more than 50% of its energy that it was getting from Russia, the Americans now invite them to send their industries to the US, where energy is cheaper and more reliable. I'm not making that up. That's the American pitch to Germany. We've destroyed your energy infrastructure. Move your factories here and even your skilled workforce here. We'll fast-track green cards for your engineers, for your semiconductor experts, for all the individuals who made Germany great, rich, and powerful. We will offer you a new home in the land of, if not free energy, then dirt cheap energy compared to what you'll have to pay at home. These economic self-harms that the German government of little soldier Schulz, a fragile, flaky Weimar Republic leader, if I ever saw one, are of course leading to societal pressures inside Germany that are feeding the frenzy of inchoate rage and frustration at the situation Germany finds itself in. Having been the economic powerhouse and the financial bank of the European Union, it sees itself literally coming apart at the seams as a result of the NATO proxy war in the Ukraine. And of course, just like in Hitler's time, there are a ready-made mass of potential scapegoats that those who wish to destroy democracy in Germany can make use of. In this case, the millions of migrants and refugees that the foolish policies of the predecessor Chancellor Angela Merkel have visited upon Germany, hoping to make use of the low labor cost of the cheapest of cheap labor to help fuel the German economic revolution. Now all these migrants and refugees are just sitting there waiting to be scapegoated by the kind of proto-fascists whom I presume were to be the fodder of Heinrich XIII's attempt to overthrow the German Republic, unmasked today. A princely thorn in the flesh of the commentariat, of the literati, of the glittering, bright, shining liars of the liberal classes in the United States is what Elon Musk has certainly turned out to be. His leak to Matt Taibbi, the respected journalist in the United States, a man of unimpeachable journalistic integrity, unlike the hyenas that are now ferociously descending upon him actually doxing him, practically inviting physical harm upon him and his family. For what? For reporting what the man buns and the man bag, skinny jeans and sneaker brigade in San Francisco were doing with the public square. They were ensuring that those gathered in the public square in unprecedented numbers. This is my legal case, my statement of claim against Twitter, just agreed and about to be served on the courts in Dublin, in counting up the offence against me by Twitter of false labelling, shadow banning, and all the other censorship that was taken against me on an entirely bogus, absolutely false prospectus. I discovered that I have been defamed by Twitter more than 100 million times. How's that for the circulation of a libel? Almost unprecedented. I hope the judge thinks so. I really do. And Mr. Musk, the window for mediation with me is rapidly closing. But my point is, this is a public square of unprecedented magnitude. But they were carefully controlling who could speak in it, to whom you could listen in it. And they were doing so at the behest of, and in some cases, under the instruction of, the security state apparatus of the United States of America. And in place as the deputy legal general counsel of the company was a man called Jim Baker, formerly the head legal counsel of the FBI. How's that for symmetry? The FBI's chief lawyer was Twitter's deputy chief lawyer. Li Fang released transcripts today of instructions being given by the FBI in San Francisco to Twitter, instructions that were complied with to the absolute degree. The Secretary General of the state of Arizona was giving in writing orders to Twitter with which they were complying to ban this person, censor that one, expunge that story, and pretend that none of the things we now know to have been on Hunter Biden's laptop were anything other than Russian disinformation. This is more than a scandal. This is a conspiracy against the Constitution of the United States of America. This is not a few mad hats on January 6th with their bongo drums and their eagle feathers and their idiot, patriot, proud boy paraphernalia. No, this is a conspiracy at the highest level of the American security apparatus to give orders to a media company in breach of the First Amendment of the American Constitution. How's that for interference in American democracy? How's that for interference in American elections? This is not Russiagate and the Steele dossier, where young women were alleged to have been wetting themselves with excitement in a Moscow hotel room at the prospect of meeting Donald Trump. No, this is a provable, incontrovertible paper chain which demonstrates that conspiracy, and arrests will surely follow. I could name two right now that ought to be under arrest. I just have, without their names. The revealing of this malfeasance, of this absolute threat to freedom of speech and expression on the internet, is met by the Liberals not with outrage, but with outrage at the people who revealed it. You really couldn't make up this Orwellian state of affairs in which we now live, where the Conservatives are the ones demanding free speech, and the so-called Liberals and Progressives are actually in charge of strangling free speech to death. No wonder they were so quiet about the Julian Assange case, because it now transpires that long ago, at least a decade ago, these Liberals went on a long march from their previous visceral hostility to the American deep state and its security apparatus, to being mouthpieces for that very apparatus, apologists for the worst tyranny and dictatorship. No wonder they could not bring themselves until belatedly and half-heartedly to preach against the impending extradition of the world historic journalist, publisher, and truth-teller Julian Assange. Everything is now becoming clear thanks to the courage of a billionaire who is routinely rubbished by Liberals for all of his many faults. How ironic that it is Elon Musk who is revealing the truth, and his critics desperate to conceal it, to the point that the aforementioned Jim Baker actually erased, wiped much of the incriminating material from the Twitter files. God knows what was on what he expunged, because what he failed to expunge is bad enough. And in any case, bad news, Mr. Baker. Mr. Musk has employed people that can recover everything that you expunged. Let it all out into the open, Mr. Musk. Tell us all. Tell us who did what to whom and why they did it. And while you're at it, stop shadow banning and blocking the likes of Garland Nixon and my young guest, my brilliant young guest, Jackson Hinkle, this evening. Leave Garland Nixon alone. Reinstate Scott Ritter. Unshadow ban Jackson Hinkle. Take that lying label off my Twitter account. Why not? It's as well to be hung for a sheep than a lamb, isn't it? If you're going to go out, as you have darkly predicted, you might as well go out in a blaze of glory and be remembered forever. And in the last couple of minutes available to me, in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, even in the first decade of the 21st century, the news that American weapons were landing on Russian air bases 400 miles inside Russia, on air bases that house Russian nuclear bombs, would be a story almost beyond comprehension. There would be nothing else on the news except that. But that happened yesterday, and most people don't even know that it happened. You know that Moscow is closer to the Ukrainian border than the air bases struck by American weapons, presumably fired by Ukrainians or even foreign mercenaries in their hire. That means those missiles could have landed on Moscow. That means those missiles, American missiles, could have landed on the Kremlin. Are you people determined to create a nuclear holocaust on Earth? Or are you just so recklessly stupid that you imagine that the Russians will continue to thwart these provocations? Do you imagine that Putin is the worst that could be in the Kremlin? Don't you know that Putin is under intense pressure in Moscow to finish this war in Ukraine? Not by ending it, but really finishing it. No more negotiations. No more velvet gloves. No more carefully targeting. The pressure on Putin to respond to this most gigantic of provocations of American missiles landing in Russian air bases 400 miles deep into their national territory is clearly being underestimated by you, or you want a nuclear war. And if you want a nuclear war, the German people, the French people, the British people, and yes, the American people have got to ask themselves, are your leaders acting in your interests, or are they acting in the interests of others? Do you want to risk the end of the world for a country you couldn't place on the map, for cities you could not spell and certainly could not pronounce? Because if the answer to that is no, then you better get hold of your leaders pretty damn quickly, because your leaders are leading you directly into that good night. I told you, it's going to be a bumpy night, so fasten your seatbelts. This is the mother of all talk shows.
Hello, America. It is me, Joe Biden. I think I'm not reading a teleprompter. I'm perfectly capable of speaking for myself. Myself.
The giant Labour Party sailing clearance is now on. Hurry now, as we've got zero interest in our party. It's literally the lowest it's ever been. Give up on the common man and save today. That's right, we're getting rid of all of the Corbynites. Literally every single one. Being a Blairite has never been more in style. Only available at what should be the UK's biggest political party. The new Labour Party. We're doing this again.
Time, weather, and...
Let's play a game and I'll ask you yes or no questions. Ready? Okay then. Sick and tired of hearing the same old voices on the wireless? Are you looking for an alternative opinion to the mainstream media? Do you have a thing for a Scottish accent? If your answer is no to one or more of these questions, then you need the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Listen, watch, and share the fastest growing political program in the world.
1.3 million people watched all or part of the mother of all talk shows in the last 7 days, in the last week. Just think about that. With no advertising budget, no promotion budget, and absolutely zero mention in any mainstream media outlet. 1.3 million people in the last week. And this show is being brought to you and would not otherwise be on the air by my good friend Ravi at Critical Cosmetics. He's responsible for my wondrous complexion. and indeed the wonderful foodstuffs, so good you can put them on your face or eat them in Critical Cosmetics' new packages that can now be delivered free virtually everywhere, certainly in North America and on the European continent. So please do visit their website. Without them, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. Our phone number, if you want to respond to what I've said, what I didn't say, what you hear any of the guests say, or what you just want to say, here are the numbers. If you're in the UK or Ireland, the number is 08081965522. That's 08081965522. Or in the US or Canada, it's +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. In both cases, it's absolutely free of charge. But if you're in the rest of the world, which of course does exist, it's 44203 966 2625. That's +44 203 966 2625. We have one of our most distinguished guests coming up right now. He is a former head of criminal law at the Pentagon, a former Virginia senator, a real live colonel. He is, of course, Senator Colonel Richard Black, and he joins us now for the first time, Senator, on the Mother of All Talk Shows, though I have followed your work for a very considerable time. Let me, in welcoming you, ask for your opinion on the escalation implied in the attacks on the Russian air bases, 400 miles inside Russian territory. For me, this is a terrifying turn of events. How does it look to you?
Well, what it shows is that the West, NATO, the United States, the UK, understand that Ukraine has lost the war. They will not win the war. There's absolutely no chance of them winning. And what has happened is that the West has become incredibly, almost insanely reckless in provoking a nuclear war. We've done it in the past. As you mentioned earlier, we sabotaged the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines. They don't belong to us. They belong to Germany and to Russia. But we sabotaged them to cut off the gas. We helped to sink the flagship of the Russian fleet, the cruiser Moskva. We sent to the bottom 300 young Russian sailors. The recklessness is so extreme. And you think of what started the First World War, where there was an assassination of the Archduke and his wife, and that resulted first in 18 million people being killed in the First World War, quickly followed by 50 million more in the Second World War, all starting from 2 people. And yet you look at the things we're doing now. We're flying drones, and I say the United States has disavowed any involvement, but at this point, it's a little hard to believe that Ukraine does anything without pre-clearance from the United States. And so we are literally attacking centers of nuclear power in Russia. And I'm sure that there are at least some elements that do it with the intention of triggering a spark, setting off a spark that will ignite the nuclear holocaust and probably kill 60% of the world's population and most all of the people in the West.
It is the age-old question, Senator Colonel. Are they fools or are they knaves? Is it reckless stupidity, or is it a predetermined and carefully calibrated plan Do they want a war, or are they just recklessly stupid about creating the conditions for an all-out war between NATO and Russia?
I think what you see is a struggle between factions of the deep state. There are those who feel that it would be madness to trigger a nuclear war with Russia, and there are factions that are willing to gamble all of humanity on a chance to dominate Russia, to break it apart, to seize its natural resources, which are vast and incalculable in size. So it's not as though there is sort of a monolithic force that is bringing these things together. It's that there is a struggle internally, and that there are people on the ground, there are Americans on the ground right now who are advising Zelensky, and they, in many cases, are allowing the most wildly reckless things to occur. Often they are literally the planners of these things. It's very, very dangerous what's going on right now.
Now, most of us here, I hope you don't find it offensive, most of us here have difficulty in believing that Joe Biden is in charge. But, of course, he is responsible. As the commander-in-chief, you were an insider at the Pentagon. Would he have had placed on his desk a proposal to fire missiles 400 miles into air bases which contain nuclear weapons inside Russia? Would that be the level of decision? Would he be the level at which a decision like that would be made?
I can't say for sure. I do know that when we aided in the assassination of 13 Russian generals and the sinking of the flagship, that President Biden became furious that the fact that we had done it was leaked in the press. Now, he should have been angered that it happened, that it was done, that something so wildly reckless occurred, but he obviously was not. His concern was that this had hit the press. It has to occur to me that perhaps he knew in advance that these things were being done. So I cannot tell you specifically whether he knows about the flight of the drones. I'm going to tell you, if I were the president and someone sent drones to attack a nuclear war site in Russia, which is one of the two great nuclear superpowers, if they did that without my permission as president, I'd have them locked up the same day. I mean, literally, I would throw them in prison and then figure out the charges afterwards, because they would have risked the future of all Western civilization by doing this. And so I can't tell you that he knew, but he certainly should have been informed.
Neither of us knows the mindset of the Kremlin, but I have many sources, as no doubt do you. And my sources tell me there is mounting anger around Putin, never mind outside on the streets, but outside on the streets, mounting anger at the way in which this war is dragging on, and that such provocations as the attack on the nuclear bases in Russia, or for that matter, the now daily massacre of civilians in Donetsk, Ukrainian civilians massacred by Ukrainians, and there's a growing push on Putin to take the gloves off and finish this war. Do you think that that is logical? And if so, whether Putin is likely to respond to it?
I think it is happening. people in the West misunderstand the mindset of the Russian people, and they sort of interpret this to mean that somehow the Russians are losing their incentive to pursue the war. Not at all. The Russian people are frustrated that initially Russia went in with velvet gloves, trying to minimize casualties, trying to maintain good relations with the people of Ukraine. And they went in with an extraordinarily small military force. It was not a practical force for what they were about to undertake. To their credit, I think the Russian high command did not realize that they were going to encounter the kind of resistance that they did. But here's where we are right now. Ukraine has, of course, you read what the mainstream media tells you about the war, and you would think that Ukraine is doing quite well. The fact is, just the other day, the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, said in a video that was published on Twitter that more than 100,000 Ukrainian military people, soldiers, have been killed in the 9 months. Now, to me, I'm able to relate this because I fought in Vietnam, which was our last really bloody war that the United States fought. We had 58,000 people who were killed over a 10-year period. It was a 10-year war. It works out to where we had 485 people killed each month on average. That's the United States in Vietnam, 485. At Bakhmut, where there's an enormous battle being waged between Ukraine and Russia right now, right at this very moment as we speak, in Bakhmut, Ukraine is losing between 500 and 700 soldiers in a day. Okay, so they are losing in one day what the United States lost in a month in Vietnam. Now, so right away you've got 30 times as many dying, and then you have to realize that Ukraine has a much smaller population than the United States had back in those days. The U.S. had about 200 million during the Vietnam War, and Ukraine has about 37 million. And that's a high estimate because there have been about 7 million who have fled the country to avoid the war. So they have a very depleted population and enormous, just astounding numbers of Ukrainians have been thrown into the front lines, ground to hamburger meat by Russian artillery. It is true that they have managed to eke out some victories. They drove Russia out of Kharkiv, where Russia was clearly overextended, and they had light forces there. And then they claim that they also drove Russia out of Kherson in the south down towards the Black Sea. But the fact is, they didn't really drive the Russians from Kherson. The Russians were dangerously overextended across the Dnieper River, and they did a very professionally executed strategic withdrawal to avoid being overextended. Right now, and this has been very credibly reported in the Washington Post of all places, the Ukrainians have they've managed to get all the low-hanging fruit. And at this point, the Russians are behind very, very icy rivers, and they have built 3 lines of defense. They've put in vast minefields, and at this point, these are just slaughtering grounds for the troops that Zelensky is ordering into battle. Now, he doesn't give a hoot what happens to these people. He's been ordered to keep this war going. The war is feeding the war profiteers, the arms manufacturers, and it's helping to keep the West, to keep the United States with a lock on the energy markets. There's a lot of money being made, and his job, Zelensky's job, is to keep the war going and just to fight to the last living Ukrainian. And he's doing a pretty good job of wiping out the troops in Ukraine.
I thought originally, Colonel, that the Dnipro would be the dividing line between an eastern Ukraine absorbed by Russia and a western Ukraine absorbed by NATO, the EU, and so on. But I no longer can see how Russia could tolerate the existence of what would then become a NATO armed camp west of the Dnipro. And that short of a profound regime change in Kiev, Russia now has no incentive itself to end the war. Putin said yesterday, we're done with negotiating with Ukraine. And it strikes me that, I don't want to be Shakespearean about it, but they are already steeped in blood, so that whether it's bloodier to go on or go our is a moot point. That Russia would be as well continuing until there is no NATO, EU, Western Ukraine. There is only a Ukraine that is neutral and provably neutral.
You know, I spoke before the AfD party and the Bundestag. They invited me over to Berlin, and I spoke to the members of the party. Very, very impressive people. And I told them, this was back in June, and I told them that this was the time for Ukraine to negotiate, because they were at the height of their power and their negotiating position. And I said, look, at this point, if they negotiated, they probably could manage to get all of Kiev under their control, including the part that's east of the Dnieper River. They probably could get Russia to guarantee that that they would get the port in Odessa, which is absolutely vital to them. And I think that is accurate. Now, today, you raise some possibilities, and you have to remember, Russia did not mobilize before they crossed the border. They were forced into going into Ukraine because of this huge buildup of Ukrainian armed forces around the Donbass. Now, the Donbass, those are Russian-speaking people. They're ethnic Russians, and they're about to be attacked by this massive Ukrainian army, armed and trained by the West. And so Russia was forced to go in. And it's unbelievable. Russia had never mobilized. And here you had Europe being told, oh, they're going to take over the world. The Russians are going to invade everybody. They're going to be on your doorstep tomorrow. Well, there's rubbish. There was nothing to it. The Russians were unprepared for a war. They had done everything in their power to avoid a conflict. But now, what they have done is they have mobilized. When they started the mobilization, they had 90,000 troops on the front lines. Now they have 200,000 on the front lines. Within a couple of months, they're going to have 400,000 on the front line. And these are conservative, because they're not stopping the mobilization with just that. They're continuing. And so what is happening is President Putin has a massive force, and it's also backed up by huge amounts of armor. And this is not the armor they used at the beginning, the old stuff. This is the new stuff. It's the best, and the best of the aircraft. And they're also expanding the number of drones and so forth. So they have an immense force. And at this point, the Ukrainians are just ground down. They're stuck out there in the cold, in the ice. They can't evacuate their casualties. They can't bring in ammunition. The drone attack that's being waged by Russia against Ukraine is very precise, very targeted, and it's knocking out the electrical grid, which also shuts down the water supply. And importantly, you have to realize that the railways in Ukraine operate on electricity. The locomotives are electrically driven. And so when you shut down the electrical grid, you shut down the ability to move arms and equipment and troops by rail. So it has put Ukraine in a very vulnerable position. And for Russia, if you recognize that 2 months after the war began, back in April, Zelensky had sent a 5-page peace proposal to President Putin and asked to make peace. The Russians had sat down and they had reached preliminary agreements, and the chief Ukrainian negotiator told the Ukrainian people, he said, we have agreed on almost everything except Ukraine, which was kind of a red herring that was thrown in there as a bargaining chip. Nobody expects that Ukraine will ever go back or that Crimea would go back to Ukraine. So in any event, Russia and Ukraine had reached a preliminary agreement, and that's when Prime Minister Boris Yeltsin flew into Kiev unannounced and basically ordered Zelensky to knock off this business of peace negotiations, get back to war. We put a huge amount of money into arms and supplies, and we expect a return on our dollar. And so at that point, there were very few casualties. The war could have ended on a mutually acceptable basis for Ukraine and Russia, but the UK blocked it, and they would never have done that without the explicit approval from the White House. There's no way that they would have done it independently, since we have most of the forces involved. So now all of these poor Ukrainian kids have gone out and been slaughtered massively. Lots of Russians have also lost their lives, not nearly as many as Ukrainians, but still lots and lots of Russians have died. I think the Russian people are past the point where they're going to accept some sort of minimal accomplishment on the battlefield. I could only speculate where this will go. I feel confident that at least part of Kiev will fall under the Russians, the part that's on the Russian side of the Dnieper, towards Russia. I suspect that Russia will want to go forward and capture the port at Odessa, which will make Ukraine a landlocked country, completely dependent on Russia for the export of its wheat and its other products. And at that point, I think you'll see that Ukraine will no longer be able to be this bellicose mouse that roared. It's not going to be able to do that in the future. And I think at this point, Russia, it has negotiated in good faith. It helped the negotiations back during Minsk, when the Germans and the French could see this coming back in 2014. Russia helped with to encourage the negotiations that ended the war supposedly in 2014. But it never took hold. Ukraine never carried out its obligations under Minsk. And then again, in April of this year, we blew up the peace talks. I don't think Russia is going to fall for this again. I think they're going to win the war on the battlefield. And I would just say to Ukrainians, watch out, because if you think things have been bad so far, you're going to see something that is way beyond anything you conceived of before.
Senator Colonel Richard Black, former head legal counsel at the Pentagon, thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Here's the poll for the evening. Should Joe Biden pardon Julian Assange? Reaching the witching hour now on the Assange case. Yes, 93% on Twitter, 7% no. On YouTube, 93%, 7% no. And on Telegram, 99% yes, 1% no. Thousands of people have voted. Make sure you get your vote in before the end of the show. Some dark news I must bring you. According to the BBC, Peru's President Pedro Castillo has tried to dissolve Congress and is now reported to be at a police station. It's not known, say the BBC, if he has been arrested, but it looks pretty likely that he is president of Peru no more. Peru's President Pedro Castillo is in a police station in Lima. It's not known if that is for his own protection or if he is under arrest. So the poll is there for you. The phone numbers 08081 965522 for the UK and Ireland, +1 844 944 3344 for the US and Canada, and for the rest of the world 44203 966 2625. I've got to tell you, I think you just listened to an historic interview with a former Vietnam military officer, former head legal counsel at the Pentagon, former senator for Virginia, and retired Army Colonel Richard Black. This is not George Galloway telling you what he just told you. This is Colonel Richard Black of the United States telling you what he's just told you. And here's the point. You would never hear Richard Black on the so-called mainstream media ever. And he would never be allowed to impart the home truths to you that he just did here on the Open University of the Airwaves. Let me go straight to the phone lines. Ian in Hounslow. Always welcome, Ian. What would you like to say?
Yes, George. I've been following the news in Germany, but this was long predicted. I did quote Andrew Dorf. I think it was Douglas Murray did warn that they think that people will just keep taking it, all this wokeness, all this PC business, anti-white working class, and that there would be a tremendous backlash in the wake of these liberal elites. They have no idea what demons that they're summoning up. And it's generally a fascist backlash. If you look at the rise of very right-wing leaders in Sweden and Denmark, you've got the Front National in France and in Ireland. If you look on the YouTube, which is not seen on the mainstream media, people holding protests, local communities that have had all these illegal immigrants bust into working class areas, not into the lovely areas who have come up with this policy. It's like a general a revolution brewing across Europe, and it's quite worrying.
Well, it's more than quite worrying. It is intensely worrying. All the materials, inflammable materials, are there on the ground, and particularly in Germany. And given the history of Germany, almost in my lifetime, if that doesn't frighten you, then I'm not sure you are still awake. The existence of economic collapse, financial pressure, cold, unemployment, and the dismantling, just like reparations, of literally your own factories. Whilst in your country there are millions of migrants and refugees that were brought in by German capitalism to provide cheap labor, to compensate for the falling birth rate amongst the German people themselves, all these inflammable materials are lying around waiting for a spark. And who knows when that spark will be struck, and who knows what the final account of the conflagration would be. Thank you, Ian. Let's go to the United States, to Idaho. Our old friend Eve in Idaho on Russia. Go ahead, Eve.
Hello. Yes, I have a comment following Scott Ritter last interview you had on Sunday, and also something that Colonel Black was saying. So let's suppose that Putin, like as Boris Johnson said, Putin is evil, Putin is a new Genghis Khan, Putin is a new Hitler, Putin is going to invade Poland after he invades Ukraine. Let's assume that they are genuine when they say that, they believe in that. How many days of ammunition do you think that the leader of that country, of England, is going to have is in arsenal? And in the show last Sunday, Scott Ritter told you the answer. England had 2 days of ammunition if you assume parity with the Russians. 40,000 rounds, for instance, of 155 millimeter, and the Russian, let's say, expend 20,000 a day. So England has 2 days of ammunition. So there are a few consequences of that. The first is that they are complete liars, and they know full well that Russia will not invade Europe. But there is a second possibility, and that goes a little bit with Colonel Clark was saying, is that they know that they cannot reach parity with the Russian in a conventional war, and so they try to escalate it to a place where they have parity, and this is nuclear weapon, you know, what they call, I don't know, little nuclear weapon. And this is very troubling, and that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and of course it's clear that, and that's why Putin talked today about Russia's doctrine on nuclear weapons. He made it clear that Russian law, Russian military doctrine is a no first strike policy, that Russia will not be the first to use nuclear weapons in any conflict, but that it has the world's best nuclear weapons, and it will definitely use them if it is attacked by nuclear forces, or if its existence as a state is threatened. And we must be at least headed in that direction. Even if they're merely fools in Washington, still more if they are knaves, if they are deliberately trying to create a nuclear war, or if they're so recklessly stupid that they will drag us into one, even if that was not their intention. And that's why I, for one, am going to listen to Colonel Black all over again after this show. I want to go through line by line all the things that he said, because he knows the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, the Beltway. He knows Washington politics, and he knows war, and he knows the military. Eve, thank you very much. Guni, 1972, asks, what would the USA do if someone launched a drone attack on one of their B-52 bombers? Are we going to see a new Gulf of Tonkin event? Well, one of the things that is now obvious, Guni, is that all of that which has gone before in our lifetime is nothing compared to what we are seeing now. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a mere bagatelle compared to what we are in now in Ukraine. The Russians had never any intention of firing nuclear weapons at the United States from Cuba and quickly agreed to remove them. But the Americans are moving nuclear weapons right now into all of their European satrapies, and Russia believes that the Americans would use them. And that's why the situation we're in now is much more terrifying than anything that has gone before. I mean, the Cuban Missile Crisis, I mean the Berlin crisis before that, I mean the Korean War before that, the Vietnam War before that, I mean the Afghan War, the Iraq War, the Libyan War. This knocks all of those into a cocked hat. And the biggest frustration for me is that thanks to the mainstream media, virtually none of our public knows just how dangerous the current conjunction of events is. We've got the one and only Jackson Hinkle up next, but I want to thank Critical Cosmetics, Ravi, 220kminc.com, because without them this show would not be broadcasting. They are making all of this possible on a Wednesday. So I need you at least to visit their website and, if possible, to purchase from their product range, which I promise you, with all my heart, will be the best thing you ever purchased. Thanks, Ravi. Thanks, Critical Cosmetics. Stay tuned. It's Jackson Hinkle, the man they couldn't gag, coming up next on the mother of all talk shows. 220km develops the most unique and nutrient-rich ingredients and cosmetics in the world and regenerates native ecosystems, healing the earth for future generations. These are nature's ingredients, simplified. Their secret is in the unique processing techniques used for nutrient retention, freeze drying and stone grinding, zero biomass waste. All products, including their face and hair mask powders, are all natural and food grade, making them as safe for your body as the ingredients in their original form. 220km Inc. wants you to experience the critical brands of cosmetics and ingredients they offer this holiday season. And to ensure you will, they're offering free shipping to Canada, USA, Europe, UK, and Australia. Just purchase any 2 items from their online store and you will be eligible for free shipping. Try their all-natural, chemical-free, zero-waste face and hair powders or get creative in the kitchen. I do, with their collection of nutrient-rich ingredients. Why not try them? Visit 220kminc.com today.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, this poll is big. Should Joe Biden pardon Julian Assange? Yes, 93% on Twitter, 93% on YouTube, 99% on Telegram. This squares with the extraordinary poll that Elon Musk conducted on Twitter, in which 3.3 million people voted, and 80% of those demanded the pardoning not just of Julian Assange, but of Edward Snowden also. This poll, which is open at least for another 45 minutes or so, please vote on it. And if you're on the YouTube channel watching me now, please subscribe to it. It costs you nothing, just click. And while you're at it, click the thumbs up sign. It helps us algorithmically. And if you're not yet following me on Telegram, please do so. t.me/George Galloway. Now, Jackson Hinkle is a rising and brilliant young star of American television and radio. And their problem with him is he's an all-American boy, but with very radical views about what America should be in the world, what America's priorities should be for Americans at home. And he doesn't just speak the truth. Lots of people speak the truth, but he speaks it with eloquence, with an effervescence, with a clarity that his enemies can't bear him. And they've had him banned from Twitter. But he's not called the comeback kid for nothing. He's back on Twitter, and he's back on the mother of all talk shows. It is the host of The Dive, Jackson Hinkle. Thanks for joining us again, Jackson. First of all, let's spend a moment or two on what happened. Why did they ban you from Twitter? And why does Elon Musk keep doing these things?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure being on your show. I was very surprised. Elon Musk claims to be a free speech absolutist, and that's kind of why he bought Twitter. And as a free speech absolutist myself, I was very happy to see that he purchased Twitter with that, that dream in mind. Unfortunately, his actions have not lived up to his word, despite the fact that he has done some very good things. I have loved to watch the Hunter Biden files come out with Matt Taibbi. That's been amazing. We've seen a lot of people unbanned from Twitter, but it seems as though there's been simultaneously a lot of anti-war voices, particularly voices that call out the lunacy, the hypocrisy surrounding what's going on in Ukraine, who have been banned. Not just me, but Scott Ritter, Garland Nixon. You still have a ludicrous title on your Twitter account, as we all know. And the question is, why would you buy Twitter for $44 billion if you are going to suppress the same voices that challenge the official narratives that have ended up us all in the crises that we're currently facing, between the economic crisis in the West, the energy crisis in Europe, the war crisis we're seeing unfold in Ukraine and soon to be in China? It really doesn't make a lot of sense. And, I was reinstated. My account was reinstated after being banned for 24 hours. But George, if you can believe this, I woke up this morning and my Twitter account is again suspended for another 7 days. So first I got a permanent suspension. I'm back for 24 hours after that. I wake up this morning, I have another suspension for quote unquote hate speech, which we all know is just, it's a loophole that these censors use to silence dissident voices who call out their lies.
I'm just wondering if Musk knows these kind of things. He's a busy guy. He's got a lot of things on his plate, and he is, of course, distracted somewhat on the Twitter files, which we'll come to. But I'm wondering if these are the last holdouts, like these Japanese soldiers that held out for decades on the Pacific Islands, refusing to accept that the war was over. I'm wondering if some of the man buns with their man bags are still holding out in the Twitter hierarchy, and it's them that is carrying out these rearguard actions.
Well, you're right about the fact that Elon Musk is a busy man. I mean, he's got 5 different companies, 9 kids, and he's doing more journalism than any journalist in America right now with the Hunter Biden files. I mean, it's again been just incredible to see what's going on. But I do wonder, Elon Musk is a man who's funding Starlink in Ukraine. He's talked about funding Starlink in Iran to help the color revolution in Iran. He's got loads of very, very generous Pentagon contracts that, he's amassed over the years. And one of the first things he did when he bought Twitter was go and do like a parade at the Pentagon itself and give himself a big pat on the back for helping the Pentagon identify all of these previously anonymous users on Twitter that are soon to be, no longer anonymous. Whether you like it or not, that's what's going to happen. And the U.S. intelligence community is definitely going to benefit from that. So I worry, but who really knows? I mean, do I think that Elon knows what's going on with my Twitter account? Probably not. I mean, maybe the first suspension he did, and that's why I was reinstated. But again, the question isn't really whether or not Jackson will get reinstated, whether or not Garland or Scott will get reinstated. It's a broader question of free speech. And if you, as a chief of Twitter, are not willing to bring and allow for the most vile voices on the internet, or at least what you interpret to be the most vile voices on the internet, on your platform, so long as they're not inciting violence, committing libel, slander, fraud, or anything that's illegal per free speech laws in the United States, then you are not a free speech absolutist. And, you know, it's crazy to think about this for some maybe, but that would even mean allowing for people like Kanye West to remain on the platform in spite of what he said over recent days. I mean, you know, I'm a Stalinist. I'm no way, shape, or form sympathetic to Nazis, especially Hitler. So I condemn what Kanye West said, but if you're going to allow for the Azov battalion, the Nazi Azov battalion from Ukraine to remain on the Twitter platform, why are you taking down Kanye West? I mean, it's just complete hypocrisy.
Yeah, maybe West didn't get the memo that we're only allowed to support Nazis in Ukraine, not any other Nazis, at least for now. The likelihood of Musk getting any more Pentagon contracts must be limited, however, because lo and behold, no sooner had he released the Twitter files, one of his companies is now under investigation for cruelty to animals, it would appear. He has now brought down on his head, and by extension Matt Taibbi as well, they brought down on their heads the whole might and wrath of the liberal establishment in the US. What could possibly go wrong? How's that going to end?
Well, you know, I think that most Americans still support the idea of free speech. Obviously, you have all these massive NGOs that are funded by, you know, these outside resources like the Open Societies Foundation, for example, who've been trying to indoctrinate Americans with this cancerous liberal ideology that free speech is bad. It's just completely antithetical to what we're supposed to stand for as Americans and as freedom-loving people, not just Americans. So I don't know how it's going to unfold. I think most people are obviously supportive of what Elon and Matt and others are trying to do right now in exposing the truth, and I think that will take them far. But you're not wrong to point out that the mechanisms of power are going to be wielded against Elon Musk for trying to expose what's going on with the Biden family, the corruption between Biden and Ukraine, Biden and liberal forces in China, Hunter Biden and Metabiota biological research facilities in Ukraine and Eastern Europe. You know, all this stuff is very, very damning for the Biden family. And I think, if Elon Musk takes Jack Dorsey's advice, former CEO of Twitter, to release all of the Hunter Biden files uncensored, I can't imagine that the elite are going to be happy about that.
Don't you think that we've now at least begun to see the tip of some crimes here? I mentioned in my introduction that at least what I've seen, and I haven't by any means read it all, there's two pieces of written evidence of government officials giving orders to a media company, Twitter, and Twitter complying with those orders. One from the state of Arizona, about which I'm sure much more later. The state of Arizona, I mean, seems to be the epicenter of a lot of dark things that have happened. And the other from the FBI in San Francisco. We've got clear paper chain that you can see the state organs giving orders, the media company complying and cooperating. That's a clear breach of the US Constitution, isn't it? And thus a crime.
In a country that is giving Ghislaine Maxwell, the co-conspirator of Jeffrey Epstein, probably less than 20 years in prison. It's probably going to be a nice prison that she's put in for facilitating the largest international child sex trafficking ring of all time. She gets 20 years, whereas Julian Assange is being prosecuted for 175 years for crimes he didn't commit as a non-U.S. citizen. I don't have a lot of hope in the U.S. judicial system, or at least in the people that are currently operating it. And, it's, again, I think that those people in these positions have been indoctrinated to believe, quite honestly, that free speech is bad and that, yes, we should be silencing mismal and disinformation, whatever that means. Who decides that, right? The DHS literally came out this year with the idea of creating a public ministry of truth on behalf of the U.S. government. And then they axed the idea, but they did come out and say one thing when they axed the idea of a U.S. Ministry of Truth. They said, well, the reason why we're not going to move forward with this Ministry of Truth is because of reasons of duplicity, meaning that they already do this within the Department of Homeland Security. They already have institutions, network infrastructure that silence dissident voices that put out, quote unquote, mismal and disinformation pertaining to Russia or China or COVID or whatever. So this is already commonly held principles and policy within the federal government between administrations, both Republican and Democrat. They don't care about the free speech, and they certainly don't care about upholding U.S. law fairly and firmly.
Now, I just interviewed Colonel Richard Black, former Virginia state senator and former chief legal counsel at the Pentagon, about the international situation, Jackson. You are way too young to remember the many crises that I have myself lived through, but I'm very firmly of the view that none of these previous crises were as great as the one that we now face. As I put it to him, in any decade of my lifetime, American-supplied weapons landing on a Russian nuclear base 400 miles inside Russia, i.e. deeper inside Russia than Moscow is, would be the biggest story in the world. And we'd all be going to bed tonight scared that war would be on us in the morning. And yet this happened this week. And nobody except thee and me are talking about it.
It's really crazy. It's really crazy. The as you put it in your conversation with the colonel, it wasn't just one side. I mean, they bombed they took the drone over the Engels Air Base, and the Russians claimed to have shot it down, which is what caused the explosion at the base. But it wasn't just that base. I mean, there was multiple areas within deep Russia that were hit by these drone attacks over the past few days. So, yeah, I fully agree with you. Now, the thing I will say is, thank goodness we have a leader that has at least exhibited as much stability and, reason and logic as we've seen in recent years in the likes of Vladimir Putin. Because let me tell you, if Joe Biden were president of Russia, if, George Bush were president of Russia, if Barack Obama were president of Russia, I think we all know what the response would be if you had strategic bombing facilities, the top most preeminent facilities for Russian airspace artillery was being bombed by the number one foreign adversary of your country. It would not be good. It would be a very, very vicious, aggressive, military response. And Putin has not done that yet. Putin has not done anything that I've seen yet that would warrant something that I'd say is out of line. He's been very steady in this entire operation. He has not let any of the attempted provocations get in the way of the goals of the Russian special military operation in Ukraine, despite the attacks on the Crimean Bridge, despite the explosions within the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines, despite the terror attacks in Crimea, despite the terror attacks and attempted terror attacks in Zaporozhye, despite the terror attacks on the Turk Stream pipeline, despite everything that's happened, the constant terror attacks attacks on the people of Donetsk and Lugansk. And just this week, may she rest in peace, there was a politician within the Donetsk City Council who was assassinated by a Ukrainian attack. Despite all of this, Putin has kept a very steady line, and he's kept his eyes focused on what his goals are in Ukraine, which he made very clear at the start of the war. So I think if it were not for Putin, we'd have a very different situation in global events right now. And yes, we are in a very, very dire situation, no doubt.
Jackson, now that we can't, for 7 days at least, see you on Twitter, how can people follow your work and support you?
You can follow along on my YouTube show, The Dive with Jackson Hinkle. That's where I do most of my broadcasting and videos. And that's where I'm going to be live there later tonight. So that's where you can find me.
Fabulous. Jackson Hinkle, as always, thank you so much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Should Joe Biden pardon Julian Assange? That's the poll on my Twitter handle, on my YouTube channel, on my Telegram channel. Make sure you get your vote in quickly. But it's calls all the way now after this quick break. As the green smoke rose, their faces flashed out, pallid green, and faded again as it vanished. Then slowly the hissing passed into a humming, into a long, loud, droning noise. Suddenly, a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out after it. Forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each man were suddenly and momentarily turned to fire. It's terrific, that War of the Worlds, if I say so myself. I hope I've done it justice. I'm not Orson Welles, but I'm the next best thing, at least still alive today. If you want to listen to it, then you need to support me on Patreon. It's not even the price of a cup of tea in the most insalubrious cafe. So I hope that you will support me at least by that amount by signing up to my Patreon page, patreon.com/George Galloway. I'm reading The War of the Worlds, but I have several other books up my sleeve that I'm going to read next. I'm also on February the 7th in Sunderland with the second roadshow, the MOATS Roadshow, mother of all talk shows on the road in Sunderland. There's the details there. Get your tickets now. They've slowed up a bit, actually, over the last few days. Maybe the World Cup, maybe the onrush of Christmas, but they're about, I think, a fifth sold so far. Mind you, it's some weeks off. Tuesday, the 7th of February in Sunderland. If you're in the northeast of England or the southeast of Scotland, then that's the place to be on that Tuesday night. It's not a Valentine's night event, but it will be full of love and kindness. Should Joe Biden pardon Julian Assange? Vote now. Let's take some super chats. I'm determined to get the MOATS America off and running in the new year on Friday evenings. It will not be presented by me, but we'll do everything except the front of house. And the front of house will be the likes, I hope, of Jackson Hinkle and Garland Nixon and others of our friends, Farron Fronczek, and our friends will rotate the front of house work. They'll pick the guests, they'll interview them, and so on. We'll do everything else. MOATS America, coming soon, if you give to the Fighting Fund, as Mr. Lover again does. £2. Thank you, sir. Harry Robinson, £2. On the super chat. Tax Dodger, £2. Big shout out to TDV Jeff Berrick. And Lars H sends Swedish 50, free Assange. Linda Petit, £10. Thanks, Linda. Albert Sontag, probably the most indefatigable supporter we have. Another $10 from Albert. Pat Daly, €20. Thank you, Pat. James Bond, £8.99, says free Palestine and free Julian Assange. David Fox, $14.99 Australian dollars. John Carroll, £17.99. Keep up the good work exposing the cabal. The sheep need awakening. Good will overcome. Thank you, John. JJ Gill, £2. Thanks for the straight talk. Red Star Betty, great name, Betty, £3. Kyle Wool, $5. Can't wrinkle the Hinkle? Absolutely not. Lover of the Russian team, best name of the night, £4.49. The US and UK are desperate for Russia's resources. That's the end game for them. Raphael Legond gives $9.99 US. The biggest mistake the West is making. They think Russia doesn't have a coalition in place if a full World War III breaks out. An army of more than 1 billion soldiers is ready to take on us in the West. A. Ants gives £10, says, war is a racket, always has been. Possibly the oldest, certainly the most vicious. Where the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives, said General Smedley Butler as long ago as 1935. On the line is Nathan in Seattle about Germany. Nathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, George. Long-time listener, first-time caller. I'm actually surprised by your being surprised by the coup in Germany. I mean, you come from the UK, United Kingdom, the land of the biggest thieves, most thuggish, violent criminals in the world. But it's no surprise to me because I'm accustomed to seeing entitled psychopaths stealing power from common people. And it's just a link to the UK because, you know, a lot of the governments throughout Europe and throughout the world have been placed by your country. And like you look at Ukraine, I always look at it like UK reign. It's just like open bragging about like control of the country. They set the policies, they set the tone for that country as well as many countries, include my own. I just finished signing paperwork because both my parents were in the military. People who have to take jobs to steal for other people, and they both were being poisoned by the military bases that they worked at. So it's just I'm never surprised by the level of depravity from Western countries. And I also wanted to just shout out my website. I'm the most censored man on the internet, lost 4 YouTube channels, just trying to elucidate certain truths about my own government as well as your own. So I just want to share and pay my respects to you for elucidating the truth to a lot of people who may not be aware of the things that you talk about.
Thank you, Nathan. I think in all humility, you're overestimating us here in Britain. We're not what we were. We are no longer the world's biggest thug, no longer the world's biggest thief, and we certainly no longer pick the governments of Europe. That is a ridiculous overestimation of us. We have a government in Britain that cannot bite its own nails, that is so incompetent that we have had, I literally don't know how many prime ministers, chancellors of the exchequer, home secretaries we have had in the last year. That's how incompetent we are. This is not a land of James Bonds. This is a land of Austin Powers. Mr. Beans, if you think that we are responsible for the picking of governments in Germany and in the United States, I'm afraid you are hopelessly misconceived. Nick is in Washington on Julian Assange. Nick is the chair of the People's Party, my own party. in the United States. Go ahead, Nick.
Hi, George. It's great to be with you.
And you, sir, what would you like to say?
Well, first of all, thanks for your show and for everything that you do and bringing attention. These great interviews I just watched with Colonel Richard Black and Jackson Hinkle. You bring attention to so many stories that aren't covered by the mainstream media, necessary attention, like the threat of existential nuclear war, which is something that we as the People's Party in the United States are protesting. What I wanted to bring attention to on your show was that this Saturday at the British Consulate in New York City, a group of us are going to be rallying, protesting, and demanding that the United States and the United Kingdom free Assange. And we will be joined by Roger Waters, Stephen Donziger, Margaret Kunstler, Max Blumenthal, Seven Gagdalin, Garland Nixon, Ben Cohen, Chuck Slatkin, and also Randy Credica, who has organized the action. And this, of course, comes on the heels, as you know, of millions of people voting to free Assange in Elon Musk's Twitter poll. And a week before that, 5 major newspapers, including the New York Times, finally, a decade late, but nevertheless, demanding that Julian Assange be freed because his only crime was that of journalism. So we hope that people will join us on Saturday at the British Consulate in New York City.
If I was in the country, I'd definitely be there, Nick. I'm wishing you all the best. I hope you have the biggest possible turnout and that your voices are many and loud enough to rattle the windows of the British consul there. The role of Britain in the crucifixion of Julian Assange is a mark of shame on our country and successive governments. Our willingness to be the lapdog of successive American administrations in this persecution of a world historic journalist is something that will never be forgotten or forgiven. I am still hopeful that we can avoid the judicial murder of Julian Assange, but time is short and opportunities to protest are limited. This Saturday in New York City, in front of the British consul, is one of the most important of those opportunities. Thanks, Nick, in Washington. Rafi is in Montreal. Rafi, welcome to the show.
Hi, George. Hope you're doing fine. It is my actually my birthday today, and I consider it a real gift
Happy
for
birthday.
me to be able. Thank you very much, George. Thank you. I want to tell you. I want to tell you first of all, George, that your show I've been following you for many years in different through YouTube or through the different channels on social media, and I want to thank you because you have really helped me into understanding politics. And as a 49 years young adult, I've always had a hard time understanding what to believe, how to compartmentalize the information getting. And through your show and through your way of explanation, being very clear and candid, has really helped me, and also helped me getting into understanding and conversing with people. Thank you for that. George, there's one thing that I'd like to ask also. You've done such an amazing time over years, for example, talk about the Palestinian cause, what's happening in Ukraine, all kinds of world situations. I would love it if one day, at one time, if you could make maybe an educational presentation about Armenia. I'm a Canadian citizen, of course. I'm Armenian. My parents are from Armenia, of course, and the Armenian story is very similar to, let's say, the Jewish story, and a lot of people don't know about it. And until today, we are being how can I say, attacked by the Azerbaijanis, and media does not talk about this at all. On a daily basis, there's Armenian soldiers dying at the border. It could be 1 here, 20 there, and nothing's talked about. It's like nothing's happening. And Armenia being part of the, part of Russia a long time ago, it seems like Russia being busy today. And can you maybe talk to us about Armenia a little bit more, and if it's possible?
I will, Rafi. Some of my very best friends are Armenian. Some of them oppressed Turkish Armenians. And of course, it is the massacre of Armenians at the end of the First World War, which gives you the right to make the point that you did in comparing the Armenians with the Jews. Both faced a genocide, and that genocide is unequally recognized. And I'm entirely in sympathy with the Armenian people. Russia has close relations, of course, with Armenia, and has a CSTO treaty obligation to defend Armenia, but it also has close relations, and needs to, with Azerbaijan. Iran has a big interest in this subject, as indeed does Turkey, as indeed does Israel. And so it's an exceedingly complicated international situation. But we'll try and find a guest who can dispassionately educate the audience on the complexities of the Armenian situation. I wish you many happy returns, Rafi, and a good night out in Montreal, one of my favorite cities in the world. Brian is in Switzerland, and let's hear from him. Go ahead, Brian.
Hello, good evening, George. First time calling in. I apologize, a little bit perhaps intimidated, not used to being on such a public forum. George,
take your time.
I'd like to ask you if you're familiar with something called the RAND report.
The RAND report, the one on Russia?
Yes, indeed. The one that was issued in 2019, titled How to Destabilize Russia.
Yeah, I've read every word of it, Brian. Summarize it for the audience.
It's astounding. It's absolutely astounding. It's a list of perhaps 40 possible actions that could be taken by the United States to destabilize Russia. And the primary objective and the reason for taking these actions is in the introduction of the document, and that is that Russia is considered to still be a peer competitor of the United States in certain areas, and that it's in the interests of the United States to diminish the influence of Russia through these 40 different types of actions. And I have it open just in front of me, and it's just like a shopping list of all the things that we see today. But, you know, when I take a look at it, expand U.S. energy production, fine. Impose deep trade sanctions upon Russia. Encourage immigration from Russia of skilled labor. But then it also goes into some interesting things. It talks about the possibility of fomenting destabilization within Belarus. Then there's an interesting area that I find that talks about encouraging Russians to believe that their leadership is acting not in their best interests, which I find really interesting. It's not to highlight where it's not acting in their best interests. It's to lead the Russians to believe that, which is pure outright strategy of disinformation.
Well, I think you're right that the RAND report was exceedingly prescient. Everything it called for has been done, so clearly it was influential. But I feel it's important to say that all of this will fall on stony ground. The Russian people are not fools. They know that Joe Biden does not have their best interests at heart. They know that the country they believe to be Mother Russia must remain large and strong, and must be able to be sovereign and independent. And they would literally, as they have done before, lay down their lives to ensure that. And anyone who thinks that the NATO and imperialist leaders are going to one day do the dance that Hitler did at the Arc de Triomphe at the Eiffel Tower, that they're going to be doing that in Red Square, Moscow, is deluding themselves. Russia is strong. It's not going to go away. It would be far better if we dealt with it rather than tried to fight it, because in any fight, we would undoubtedly be the loser. Thank you, Brian. Lester is in Maryland, USA. Let's hear what he wants to talk about. Lester, go ahead.
Hey, George. Thanks for having my call. I wanted to, kind of touch a little bit more on the railroad bill that Congress passed to, pretty much squash down any notion of a strike from the railroad workers, and de facto making them slaves, since if they quit, that would be a form of strike as well. And a lot of people, or a lot of the news, is not really going over the legality of this bill. Does it mean that if they actually quit their jobs, can they be arrested? Because they're technically would be under the notion that they are striking, and that is why they are quitting. And this is a very dangerous thing, because on top of that, they passed the second bill to give them the sick days. That didn't pass. So they basically, Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, were telling the railroad workers that you're a slave and that you have no rights to any sick days, and that you will work till you are dead. And the only thing that gave me hope is that statement that the railroad workers put out, is that they understood the kind of this insidious attack on them. They understood that was coming from both parties, that they are not blinded by it, and that they understand that they did not even get the sick day. So they are probably trying to figure out what to do next and what are the legal steps that they can do next, because a lot of people have families, they have their well-being, and they're trying to figure out if they quit, do they actually go to jail, because they can be considered as a form of strike. And we don't know what's next. Maybe the electricians, maybe the construction workers, we have no idea what's next on their hit list from Congress. So
you have perfectly summarized the plight of the railway workers in the USA, and we have a challenge to the railway workers here in Britain. I'm hoping to travel on the railway tomorrow, but if I am unable to do so as a result of strike action, I will still support the just cause of the railway workers in Britain. And one of the most repugnant sights that it is possible to imagine is fat cat politicians and even better paid fat cat media commentators sneering and insulting, smearing and slandering the woman that sweeps the railway station in my area, the guard that keeps everybody safe on the trains in my area, the railway workers that keep the country moving, despite the privatized train companies' attempts to squeeze every last ounce of profit out of what was once a public service. The railway workers keep the show on the road. And they're being asked to accept a massive wage cut. Don't believe the propaganda that they're turning down a wage increase when inflation is at 12%, predicted by April to be 23%, an offer of 4% this year and 4% next year if you accept massive job losses, the end of guards on trains, and the closure of all ticket offices. If you accept those, you can have 4 and 4. 4 this year, 4 next year. That adds up to a massive wage cut. And one of the most dismal of phenomena is other workers turning on the railway workers for having the level of organization and the backbone to stand up and fight for their rights. Victory to the railway workers in Britain and in the United States. A victory for them would be a victory for all working people everywhere. Thanks for the opportunity to say it. Nick is in Los Angeles. Wants to
I always have been and always will be firmly opposed to any changes in the law to allow assisted dying or assisted suicide. I believe the threat to the dependent, the most vulnerable, the most desperate in our society is simply too great, and therefore assisted dying or legalized assisted suicide must never become law in this country. Thank you, George. Thank you very much.
Bravo, I agree entirely, and spoke, I hope powerfully, in Parliament against this euthanasia, legalized murder. I have the most profound feelings of opposition to it, which, as you say, does not mean that the pressures on people who are terminally ill, who have lost hope, are not themselves profound, and that the pressures on people without pay and without any kind of remittance or relief are condemned to years, decades of caring for people who are terminally ill, helpless, hopeless, and so on, that these are not deep, deep mines of anguish and of pain and of doubt. But I have a moral and religious obligation to oppose it. If capitalism was a person and it could kill anyone that it liked, it would kill the one that will never again turn a penny of profit. It's very easy to imagine relatives, even family members, even husbands and wives that would like to see the back of you, either because they think you've suffered long enough or because they'd quite like to see what's in your will and quite like to spend it. I wouldn't trust, and I don't think you should, anybody to decide whether you live or die. As a religious believer, I believe that that is God's job, not yours. This is a subject we'll have to return.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Gosh darn, how do you get this thing to work? Is it that one? Is it this one here? Gosh. Was this thing built in America? Jeez. Kamala, would you get in here? I can't get the, gosh darn wireless to work.
You know I can't answer questions, Joe, when I'm laughing.
I'm trying to, listen to that Scottish guy on the wireless, the Galloway fella.
Oh, Joe, you're so funny.
I've been pressing this red button on and off and on and off. Heck, I can't get it to work. Hello, Biden residence.
Mr. President, be advised, we have executed the airstrike on Syria. Confirmed.
That's just great. How long until it gets delivered? I'm starving.
There's a call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yeah, I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier.
Yeah,
I've
go
got
ahead.
a book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here that I'd just like to read out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, I'll get him off. He's a nutter. In the UK, it's 08081 965 522, and in the US, it's +1 844 944 3344.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
There is no trick other than hard work, creativity, care, and recognizing that duty is more important than love.
The voice of Robert Maxwell, an arrogant man who used his publishing empire to gain him power and influence. But in this shocking account, never told before in this way, George Galloway recalls his first encounter with Maxwell.
It looked like a grizzly bear advancing towards me and punches me with these giant fists, like sides of ham, right in the solar plexus. So hard that I literally bent double.
Then, after George exposed Maxwell as a crook in Parliament, it was war.
Every one of his papers, the Daily Mirror, then following the Sunday Mirror, the Sunday People, the Daily Record, then a few days later the Sunday Mail in Scotland. Even the European, which he then owned. All over Galloway.
Scottish Daily News journalist Ron Mackay was there.
Every night, presumably when he had a drink in him, he would boom over the tannoy about the cretins, the fools. The majority of the workforce believed that he would take it over and their jobs would be secure. But of course he didn't. He just disappeared.
And then...
The millionaire newspaper publisher Robert Maxwell is dead.
What really happened? Did Robert Maxwell jump, or was he pushed?
It could be that he went out to, as he did, micturate over the side of the boat. I'm with Ghislaine Maxwell in that I lean towards the murder.
This is Maxwell, the monster.
You said, what is my secret? I will let you and your viewers know what it is. I'm not attached to property. Consequently, losing or gaining it means nothing to me.
I get a lot of abuse from people in America that don't listen properly. They imagine that because I am viscerally hostile to Joe Biden and the so-called Democrats, that means I'm a supporter of the Republicans and of Donald J. Trump. Neither of those is true. I'm not with either of these two big parties, two cheeks of the same backside. Even if we could agree which was the lesser attractive cheek, I still wouldn't be prepared to choose between them. I'm one of those that calls on, let me do so again here and now, my good friend Jimmy Dore to run as a third-party candidate for the People's Party of America, for a third force to emerge. That's what I want to see in America, and I'm more than happy to give whatever advice and experience that I myself have to any people of goodwill who want to build that third force. As I've said before, if my good friend Dr. Jill Stein were to be the Green Party nominee again, I would, of course, support her for President of the United States. If Tulsi Gabbard would run as an independent presidential candidate, I would support her. I would not be happy to see Donald Trump back in the White House, but I'd be very, very happy if Joe Biden wasn't. I'd be very, very happy if Kamala Harris wasn't, even if that meant that Donald Trump would have another term as President of the United States. You see my point? I regard the US Democrats as the greatest threat to peace on the planet. I believe that the world is much more dangerous with Biden and Harris and the Democrats in power, and therefore I'd be happier if anybody could replace them as President of the United States. Doesn't mean I've become a Republican, at least not a US Republican. It doesn't mean I've become Trumpist or a devotee of the great orange Hulk. I'm not either of those things. But I've got to tell you, I think Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are a clear and present danger to the American Republic. And even more importantly, from my point of view, they're a clear and present danger to the peace of the world. Avoid World War III. Get rid of Joe Biden.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.